We've come to northwest Perthshire with Tom Weir to take a walk through the longest glen in Scotland, Glenlyon, which runs for about 30 miles west of Fortingall near Aberfeldy. And it's in Fortingall that we start off. We'll be looking at quite a few trees, no doubt, as we make our way through the glen in the blazing colours of this autumn. But one thing is for sure, and that is that none of them will be older than the tree we're standing beside just now, Tom.
Oh, well, there isn't anything older than the whole of Europe, John. This one is 3,000 years old. Isn't that amazing?
And this is the famous Fortingall yew tree.
And this wall that's built round it, in fact, is to protect it, not so much from vandals, but to hold it together, because it's so old that, you know, it's got the shrinkage that comes with old age.
The middle of it really is kind of missing, isn't it? Is a number of trees sort of growing up.
Yes, but I think the original width of the tree was pretty tremendous. It tells you in this its dimensions. It's a piece that's been written up to show that Thomas Pennant was here in 1769. And, you know, there's various descriptions of this wonderful old tree. They used to light the Beltane fires here. And eventually, of course, this was the reason for the tree declining. But the circumference given is 56.5 feet when it was in its prime, maybe 2,000 years ago. An astonishing thought.
Well, there is the story, of course, isn't there, that Pontius Pilate was born here in Fortingall, which means that this tree would be 1,000 years old when he was born.
The tradition is that Pontius Pilate's father came here because he was sent to parley with the King of Scotland. And so no doubt the family came, and that's how Pontius Pilate came to be born. So this flat place, John, that you're looking at now, this strath that's just before us, it's very colourful, but it doesn't begin to compare with what's round the corner, where we'll be going in a minute. We'll pass the old fort on the way in and turn up the glen. So let's go and just see what that's like.
Well, we've come a mile or two west now from Fortingall, leaving the broad, flat strath with its fields and its stooks in it and the hills coming up on either side of it. And we're now at the entrance to Glenlyon, which is a very startling sight, I must say, Tom.
Oh, it's amazing, isn't it? You would hardly even know it was here. Suddenly everything closes in on you and you look up that blazing trench of colour. That's the only way I can think of it anyway.
Well, it's you, as you say, you would hardly know there was a glen leading out of here. It's a very narrow gorge here, and it seems amazing that there's a 30-mile glen going beyond that.
Well, it's the longest glen in Scotland.
And here on either side, the really strident colours of autumn. This is one of the best autumns I can remember for colour. This blaze of yellows, golds, reds, dark browns, and all the autumn colours, and in amongst them the dark green of the pines, and quite a lot of fresh green as well. There's a tremendous range of colours.
Well, you know, the amazing thing is if you take from the top of the hill with that blue-grey stuff, screes, outcrops of rock, and then suddenly that kind of burnt copper of the birches, they're clustering in every gully there, and then suddenly you come across this Picasso splash, you know, with, funnily enough, rounds that are still green, and just a wee bit lower down, they're almost tongues of flame. Well, I don't think you could find in Scotland anything quite to compare with this, and the reason, John, I think you would agree, is the sheer variety of the trees compressed into this short space, not only horizontally, but vertically.
This has been a particularly good year for trees, of course, and the flowering trees. There was particularly good blossom in the spring, wasn't there? And as a result of that, I suppose now we're getting this very heavy crop of berries. We passed some hollies there with a lot of berries on them. The hawthorns have got a tremendous lot of berries this year. Well, let's carry on upstream and get into the glen beyond it. The River Lion cuts through this narrow gorge for a mile or two to the west, and we're a little bit further along now, quite close down by the river, where it's flowing in the dark, peaty pools in front of us, and a little fall away to the left there, and trees growing out of cracks in the rock and up the steep sides from the river in still these blazing colours here, Tom.
Mm-hmm. Well, the amazing thing is the variety of even the same trees. You see, there's a birch that's almost entirely green. And only a few feet away, one you could only describe as golden guineas.
And the river has cut really vertically down through this, hasn't it? I mean, really narrow. almost narrow enough to jump if you were pretty good at jumping.
Yes, well, you know, there used to be a cairn on the other side, and that cairn used to mark where somebody, in fact, tried to jump it in fairly recent times, but although he got across, he failed. He fell back in again, and he was killed. But what he was trying to do was to emulate somebody who had, in fact, made a successful jump. A man jumping for his life, and I think you try harder when you're really running for it, especially if you've got bloodhounds sniffing your heels. And that man was a MacGregor, and he was being chased by enemy Campbells. So when he took off, he really took off. In fact, this man, the MacGregor, must have been really bold because he married a Campbell wife, and he was hated by the Campbells for it. And the Campbells, in due course, murdered two of MacGregor's clansmen, two of his fellows, and he decided he had to take revenge. So he murdered the man who had murdered his friends, and that's why he was having to leap back again, because they were after him, and eventually they got him. They murdered him in the end.
This was in, what, the 16th century?
Well, away back 1565, John. That's the time. That was a time of many stirring deeds.
Well, I don't suppose life in Glenlyon is just quite as feuding now as it was in those days. And in fact, in this part of the narrow part of the Glen, there isn't much sight of life, of human activity. There's a little bit of wildlife. We've had a few birds amongst the trees up here.
These long-tailed tits, John. There's a great places for long-tailed tits. I usually see them here, and with them were these coal tits that we saw, and high-flying siskins giving the plea call occasionally, and the odd chuckle of a redpoll.
And think of chuckles, there'd be the odd woodpeckers here too, I expect.
Oh yes, we heard a green woodpecker, and they've been established here for a few years now. You know, they really have made a great inroad into the north of Scotland. Once upon a time you only got them in odd bits of the southeast, so they're all over.
And as far as mammals go, we saw a red squirrel just a little bit further up the road.
That was a treat.
Obviously into this.
Well, this is their kind of country. You know, there's a lot of pine woods here, and the red squirrel with that very rich colour, very engaging animal. It is a creature. This is its natural habitat, which it shares with the wildcat. This is one of the greatest places in Scotland for wildcats.
Not so much chance of seeing them, though.
Well, not really without a bit of luck, but you know, there was a friend of mine climbing a tree one day, and he put his hand up to the branch and found himself staring into the whiskery face of a wildcat with its mouth open, ready to spit at him. So well, you never know, John, you might be lucky.
The Glen, which was bottled up at the gorge we visited further back there, has opened out now into quite a wide strath. Half a mile wide or so now, with flat hocks beside the river, meandering along the bottom of the glen, bright, fresh greens with the tawny, lumpy hills on either side going up, and still the vivid autumn colours of the trees all round about. And we've come west now to the farm of Slatich, which is farmed by Mr. John Walker.
John, Slatich, what does that mean?
Slatich was the place where the willows grew by the riverside, and they were slatted. In other words, they were split up for making baskets here.
So that was in the non-plastic age, when everything was gathered locally. You plaited your own ropes and all the rest of it, and presumably a big population would live in the glen then.
Yes, there was quite a population at that period, I reckon.
I think there was 700 here just 100 years ago in this glen, roughly 700 people. How many is in it today?
Oh, I reckon it could be down to a few over 100. Not
so?
Much over that.
In the longest glen in Scotland, a population of 100.
Yes.
What's it like to farm a place like this, 650 feet above sea level, I think you told me it was?
Yes. Well, farming is... it's quite... depends on the weather a lot up here. We lie here at a place where we're 650 feet above sea level, and the hills on either side of us rise to Benlors on the one side to a few feet under 4,000, and on the north side the Cairngorm rises to 3,300, and we're very much dependent on the weather for crops here. This glen runs east and west, and we're influenced by the Atlantic depressions when they blow in, they pour everything down on us
So
here.
you can't grow very much here then, really.
No, we grow good enough crops if the weather is good, but if we get a wet season such as we've had, it is a dead loss trying to make a crop.
Now, I was watching you there thatching a wee stack in the old-fashioned way, using the traditional stooks, a thing you'll hardly see nowadays. Can you tell me why you still use these old methods?
Well, we still make our oats in the traditional method of binding and stacking them, because it's so difficult up here to get to combines for the harvesting. We're say about 12 or 15 miles from the arable country, and by the time they finish in that area, they haven't time to come up and look at our small acreage in this glen, so we still crop the traditional method.
Now, tell me what it is apart from, you've got sheep in the hill, I take it.
Yes. We have black-faced sheep are our main source of income, plus breeding herd of suckled cows, which we rear suckled calves for selling at the autumn calf sales.
Making any money off it this year?
A dead loss, I'm afraid.
Is that right? I believe the sheep's not so bad, but I know the cattle
Oh, sheep are bad enough this year. They're just about half of what they were last year. The cattle are much the same, the averages.
Now, would you say there's a good life to be had for somebody who's fond of a wild place like this, with the kind of colour you get in the autumn, when the snow's sparkling in the hilltops, or is it only so much scenery to you, you'd rather have a better farm and know so much scenery?
Oh, no, I'm afraid I couldn't part with the hill life.
Is that
the scenery and all the rest of it is lovely, and it's a way of life up here. Just.
So for you, it's a really satisfying life?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you very much, John.
John Walker at Slattish. And we've come a bit further up the glen. We're about halfway up the glen now at Bridge of Balgie, with the Strath still about half a mile in front of us. The river a bit broader here, and still on either side of it the deciduous trees in their autumn colours that have been beside us all the way up. Unlike so many Highland glens, there are a lot of deciduous trees down at the bottom and stretching up on the sides as well. They're going up to a height of, what there, Tom, about 1,000 feet anyway.
Yes, very close to it. And on this side, right behind us, I think one of the most impressive birch woods in Scotland. See how vertically it rises. Well, you don't almost think it was smoke, though the amber tint of it, you know, rather than one tree. The total effect is tremendous. And this is where the salmon, by the way, go up. There's a wee fall there, and if you happen to be lucky, you'll see them going up one after another. But of course they can only go so far because there's a dam at the very head of the glen, and this is where the spawning grounds used to be. So nowadays the salmon are caught in nets and the eggs taken by hand, and the final work done down at Pitlochry, where they've got a hatchery. Oh yes,
a buzzard.
Aye,
going over.
That's it, John. It's a good glen for buzzards. In fact, this whole bit of the glen is excellent. You know, the buzzard is like a small eagle, broad-winged, but with a rather larger tail relative to the wings.
You can see up that tail now. It's just floating across without a single wing beat.
That's right.
Across the glen there.
You see the ragged edge of the feathers at the end of the wings there, just like a hand almost. There's quite a lot of small stuff flying around even now, you know, mostly things like tits and redpoles, but the real time to be here is the spring, when everything is singing. Because I reckon this is one of the most varied bits of country in the whole of Scotland. You've got the green hawks, where the deer, by the way, love to feed. Even as late as May, they'll be feeding in these moraines just on the other side of the green. And then with the mixed woods, you've got, you know, flycatchers, chaffinches, greater spotted woodpeckers. On the river, you've got dippers and grey wagtails. Well, you get ravens, peregrine falcons, golden eagles. I've never actually seen a merlin, but I think there must be merlins in odd places here.
Magpie calling just among the trees up there, and we saw a jay earlier on as well, there, among the trees. Well, the only shop in this 30-mile-long glen is here at Bridge of Balgie, and the person who looks after it is Miss Hattie MacDonald.
Well, Hattie, I believe these are the best colours I've ever seen in Glenlyon, and you know I've been coming here for many a year. But I would like to hear your opinion. What do you think of them?
Well, I've been here longer years than you've been coming, and I think this year excels them all.
Is that right?
I think so, yes.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear it, because I've been saying that since we started up the Glen.
Yes.
How about the folks around here, Hattie? Are there still as many here as there used to be?
Well, they come and go, sometimes and that. But of course, the farms, there used to be tenants there, but they're under the estate now, and they have shepherds in each one now.
And who's living here is over there? I know there's a shepherd. Keepers in that house up there, is it?
There is a keeper, yes.
So, really, the population here is just about half a dozen families, is it?
Yes, yes.
And your particular wee corner tends to be the Charing Cross of Glenlyon because of that road that comes in over from Loch Tay.
Well, I always say this is the centre of the city. Where all the commerce is done,
Aye. And how about visitors now? You, I know, see a great number of people here in the course of a year. How many people would you reckon that you see as tourists passing through this glen in a year?
Well, I really couldn't say. They're always saying to me, you should have a visitor's book, but I haven't started it.
Well, they seem to appreciate it anyway, Hattie. And I know this much. They appreciate you very much because, apart from getting what they're here to buy, they can always get a smile and often a cup of tea they don't expect. And that's what we're going to have now.
Well, suitably refreshed, we've come a bit further west now and are beginning to get up into a more highland landscape, having followed along at the bottom of the glen with the broadleaf trees and these bright colours. We're now climbing up a bit. The Lyon, the stream below us, is tumbling down a bit faster now than it was in the broad reaches further down, and we're getting up into Scots pine country here. These look pretty old pines here, Tom.
Well, this is a genuine remnant of the Caledonian forest. These trees have probably been growing here for 7,000 years. You'll notice, John, how the whole colour of the landscape has changed. Instead of the roadside greens, what we're getting now is the crimson of the deer grass. Yellow, crimson, splashes of brilliant birch colour. But these rather unusual pines, because of the bottle green needles and the pink bark. And you see, these colours really show up because you've got an open country. It's not a closed forest. It's a scattered forest growing from a floor of short heather, blaeberry, the deer grass that I mentioned, and all these mounds and so on. You know when you look at this kind of country that it's going to be exciting for birds.
And with these old pine trees here, will there be capercaillies here?
Oh, aye, there certainly are, but not so many all the same as you might expect, because this is blackcock country. But there was a very special capercaillie here that got renowned a few years ago.
This is our biggest game bird, almost the size of a turkey, with a big fan tail.
That's it, the horse of the woods. Now, this particular capercaillie was occupying a bit of the wood quite near where we're standing, one of these mounds, a moraine in fact. And the keeper, when he met me that morning, said, "Whatever you do, don't go up there." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because we've got a capercaillie that we're calling Jockey the Caper, and it hates the sight of people." He said, "If you go up there, it'll attack you. And if it attacks you, you better not turn your back on it." I said, "Oh, I'd like to meet Jockey." He said, "Well, I better come with you." So the two of us went, and Jimmy said, "Well, I'm not going any further. It's up to you now." And as I walked forward, I couldn't see the caper. And then I saw this thing, like a big clockwork toy, coming up the opposite slope. And as it came over the top, out went its wings at right angles. And it really looked aggressive with this great bent bill, like a pair of pliers, And as it came up, it leapt at me, and I was just in time to stick up my foot, and I heard the thud of its head against my boot. And as it stepped back, as if drawing breath, I stepped back. I stepped forward, it stepped forward, and I realised that it was taking me for a capercaillie. It was a lacking situation. So in the end, what I did was just backed away from the caper, at which it jumped up onto a branch and pirouetted, and from this great birdie throat came the most ridiculous wee rattling sound.
But it won the fight, though.
It certainly did.
That's a flock of fieldfares going across.
Yes.
Winter migrants coming in
That's right.
with the big thrushes circling overhead.
Oh, I think they're just about to pass over us.
There they go, coming in from Scandinavia, probably.
Yes.
But apart from the capercaillies, you're referring to the blackcock. This is the other big grouse, which is a bit smaller than that.
Yes, you know, the feather that the Highlander wears in his Glengarry is the tail feather of a blackcock. Well, the blackcock here meet for lecks in the morning. A lek means the Gaelic word for a flat place. And the cocks meet in the morning to fight and spar. And in the spring, the grey hens come to watch and be courted.
You have to get up pretty early in the morning to see them usually, don't you?
Well,
6 o'clock, 5 o'clock in a spring morning.
Well, I think at its best, that's the ideal. In fact, what I usually do is camp near the lake and have them lecking all round me, so I just sit up in my sleeping bag and watch them. Very comfortable.
While we've been talking just now, I've heard this morose, doleful kind of mooing coming from the hills behind us, and I take it this is the start of the rut with the red deer.
Oh yes, they're really doing their stuff now, but come another week or two it'll be very much more advanced. But now the stags that have been running together in the herd are breaking up and challenging each other to take possession of the hinds. And if you're a big fine stag with a loud voice and a fine set of antlers, then automatically you're in a strong position to dominate the other stags and take possession of the best of the hinds. And I must tell you about a very special stag that lived here. He was known to everybody as Old Jock. He was a royal in 1960, a marvellous beast, 12 points, wonderful red coat, and it was the master stag of this forest. But gradually, Old Jock acquired the name of Old Jock because he stopped going so much to the hill and started to hang around the head keeper's house just up the hill
over
there,
here, yes.
that white house amongst the trees. So the keeper's wife got in the habit of handing him a piece, usually bread or sometimes a wee bit of cattle cake, and Old Jock got bolder and bolder, and he spent more and more time at this fence. And the woman was hanging out her washing one day. She'd had back to the fence, of course, putting in the clothes pegs, when the next moment she felt a nudge, and as she turned round, of course, the stag took a wee fright, and at that moment, as it twisted its head, the sheet she was hanging up fell over the stag's antlers, blinding it, of course. And the next moment, the stag was off, kicking its heels, blundering into trees, really gone mad, until the sheet fell off, well and truly torn, incidentally.
Well, speaking of bold stags, there's a few of them up in those tawny hills now. We can hear them calling all over. They seem to be coming from all sides of us, all around in the hills, going up into the cloud there. It's just cloud just touching the tops on either side. Well, we've completed our journey up through the glen now to the west end as night is falling, and we're up above the level of the pines now. We're into the kind of bare, open landscape that characterizes so many of the Highland glens. And we've been joined by Mr. Bill Mason, one of the keepers of the estates at the west end of the glen. And as we've been coming up through the glen today, walking along through all the colours down there, I expect you've been up on the top today, have you?
Yes, I've been up on the top, up the very top end of the loch there, and crawling in through the peat hogs, and we spied our stag, the stag being about 500-600 yards from we spied him. We crawled in through the peat hogs, through mud, through peat, through heather, through grass. Oh, it was just like a sponge. We crawled right in till about 80 yards. We lay and we watched him. Then we decided we'd have him shot, so we shot him. Once we shot him, went over and we started gralaching. Well, gralaching, that is taking the inside out. Once we gralached him, I left the gilly with him and I come back, I got the snow track. I come back, put him on the snow track. Then we come back in again and we get on to the high top. We spied again, we spied another stag. So before we went in for our second stag, we'd have our lunch. This would be about 1:30, 2 o'clock.
Now, how did you decide which stag to go for?
Well, you get out and spy. You'll see at this time of year, you'll see your big stag with the hinds. And there's always this little stag lying out about. So you just go in and spy. If you see he's worth shooting, you go in and try and get him. And what we do up here, we don't just kill any stag. we'll look for the head. If he's a good head, we'll leave him. If he's a bad head, that is maybe 4 points and switch stops, we'll take him.
What's switch tops?
Switch stops is he has brow points and nothing else. Nothing else, just has the 4 points. And we spied him, we crawled in, we got about 150 yards, couldn't get any further, but the lion waited until hinds moved, and the stag and the hinds moved off.
Now, when you say you crawled in, I mean, he's keeping more or less to the one place, is he?
Yes.
And then you're having to keep to dead ground
Keep
and
the
very
dead
slowly.
ground, yes,
getting
very
it.
slowly.
Now, this could be from half a mile away, a mile away.
Mile away, could easily be a mile away from you.
It's a very slow job.
It is a very, very slow job.
Is it not a terrific task, not only seeing the stags, but maybe you've got to make a big detour for the wind and all the rest of it to
Yes.
come in on the right side.
Right. Yes.
And then once you've shot him and taken him down with the snow track, he goes into the larder, you're going to
Yes.
take the head off the following day.
Yes.
What happens to the venison?
Well, the game dealer lifts the venison, and as far as I know, it's all the way for export.
To Germany.
It all goes to Germany, yes.
Imagine that the finest meat a Scotsman could eat. I wonder why it's got to go to Germany. That's what I would like to know. And how about the things that come around the house? You know, I know this house. The keeper who was in it before was a great friend of mine, and I was telling John earlier today about the famous old Jock, the toothless stag that used
Well,
to hang
old
around.
Jock, his skull's hanging on the kennel there today.
Aye.
Yes.
And do you ever see any stags around now? Do any hang around the house?
Yes, all hung around about here. I've an old one here. You'll hear him crying up in the hill there just now.
I've
You'll hear
just
him
been
roar.
hearing one just now up on the
Yes,
hill.
well, that's old soldier.
Aye.
He comes in here and he gets fed about every night. He still comes in yet at night.
And how many teeth has old soldier?
He's like yourself, he's very, very few.
Here, you're very observant. Well, we can't contradict that, I'm sorry to say. Anyway, thinking, Bill, of the general pattern of life in the Glen, this is the busiest time of year for you,
Yes,
is it?
yes, very, very busy now.
And whenever the stags finish, the 20th of October, is it?
The 20th of
stalking season?
October, yes.
And then you start on the hinds.
Start on the hinds, yes. Well, out here in the top end, I like to start on it straight after the stags, because you've got to do that for weather. Once we get snow up there, you can't get up to them.
And how many stags, then, do you kill on these hills in your particular area?
Roughly about 150.
150 stags. And how many hinds do you have to take?
Well, they like you to take about 200, 250.
Well, that's a big task, because it's got to finish, I think, around February, is it?
Around February. We like to finish here in January.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So really, you'll be a very fit man. By the time it comes the end of February, you'll be as lean as a stag yourself.
I'm as lean as a stag, you know.
No wonder, out in the morning at 8 o'clock. I think you only came in tonight after
Yes.
8 o'clock. Is that
I've
right?
seen me coming in here, been finished, cleaned up in the land and back in the house at 10 at night.
So it's a 12 to 14 hour day,
Yes,
and no overtime.
and no overtime.
Well,
7 days a week if you like.
well, no wonder there's no queues to be a good keeper,
No.
because you live with a job all the time.
Yes.
But I think this must be one of the great rewards of the stalker, because although you're killing deer, I expect you love them.
Oh, I love them. I wouldn't live without them here. Especially once that's finished, you'll see them all round my door here, hanging about the house, all the stags.
Is that right?
Yes, so they're in here, they're standing looking in the window, they're lying out in front of the green here in the garden.
So you're a friend as well as an enemy.
Yes.
Well, there's the strange paradox of living in a glen like Glenlyon. Yours is one of the loneliest houses in this glen. How is it to live in
You
a place
could
like that?
never get nothing finer. You know your door's your own.
Bill, how would you sum up Glenlyon?
Well, Glenlyon is known as the Glen with the 3 L's.
What?
The longest, the loneliest, and the loveliest.
Perfect. You couldn't get a better description.